Hurry Revolution by Eric Schechter. Too many people don't know what is really going on, though quite a few of them think they do. Unending poverty and wars, run by a lying and immovable plutocracy, based on an unworkable and insane economic system and myths of individualism, all connected, all unnecessary. And now that system has brought us ecocide, which is about to kill us all much sooner than almost anyone realizes. We no longer have time to mess around, talking about inadequate reforms that won't even happen. We need to get down to the business of revolution. The first and greatest step is to get more people talking about revolution, about what kind and why. Join the conversation. Join a discussion. Do a teach-in. Post a video. Write a book. No, on second thought, we may not have time for a book. Write a leaflet instead. Violence is not the main tactic I have in mind. Changes imposed through violence may not last. Lasting change is voluntary and comes from understanding. Our rulers use violence to suppress the truth. See how they have imprisoned and tortured Julian Assange and other whistleblowers. More than guns, we need a revolution of ideas. If we spread our ideas quickly and widely enough, the old regime cannot suppress all of us. When you read ideas that you like, repost them, or, better still, restate them in your own words. Part 1. Reform versus Revolution. Reformists believe that everything can and should be built in little pieces, but they're wrong. The many problems we face are connected, so we can't solve one except by solving them all. We need a total change in our economic and political system. Moreover, the change must be based on an improved understanding. Reformists believe that our society is based on sound principles such as democracy and freedom, and we've merely strayed superficially. We just need to sweep out the corruption in order to get back to those sound principles. The reformists are wrong. They have misunderstood democracy and freedom. They have misunderstood what is the real basis of our society. Our democracy is an illusion. We are actually ruled by the rich. I'll say more about that later. And freedom, or independence, is as absurd as a dog on the moon. We humans are social animals living in a complex society. Thus, we are interdependent for both psychological and material essentials. What we need is not separation from one another, but harmonious, horizontal, cooperative, non-hierarchical relations with one another. The real basis for our present society is private property, and property increases inequality, as I'll explain later. Inequality is now enormous. That has terrible consequences such as poverty, war, ecocide, extinction. We need an altogether different foundation for our society. I fear that we may have a revolution too small, one that changes too little. If that happens, then we will need yet another revolution, and we don't have time for that. If we merely lock up our corrupt rulers without changing our culture, then our culture will quickly generate a new batch of corrupt rulers. We must change our culture. We need to understand the world in a new way. And now, in case any of my audience is not yet convinced, the remainder of this essay is a list of some reasons to revolt. Part 2. Lies. The world is not as it appears. We are surrounded by a seamless matrix of falsehoods. By falsehoods, I mean both intentional lies by people who know better and accidental mistakes by people who don't. Major factions of liars call each other liar, and some people are fooled by one of those factions. The world's biggest lie is that the world's problems can't be fixed, and that you should accept things as they are. Don't let anyone tell you that. A handful of companies buy and sell and control everything, and they lie in every way that serves their profits. and their lies are mirrored by the government that they control and by the mainstream news media that they own: Fox, CNN, the New York Times, MSNBC, NPR, the Washington Post, etc. Even our fictions, the stories that we watch for entertainment, are lies, in that they perpetuate our basic assumptions about our way of life, so that imagining any other way of life becomes difficult. But the internet is reaching maturity. Through it, for the first time in thousands of years, we may become able to see and say what is really going on. The internet is a mixture of truth and lies, but that's a big improvement over the unalloyed lies we had before. Get your news from non-corporate sources. I'll put a list of my own favorite sources with links in the notes on this video's transcript page. Part 3: Economic Inequality. Economic inequality in our society has become enormous. We have a few very rich people and a huge and growing number of people in dire poverty. That didn't happen by accident. Here's my explanation. If we don't share, then we trade. For labor, money, food, rent, interest, everything. A voluntary trade only happens when both traders profit. But generally there is greater profit for the trader who was already in the stronger bargaining position. That makes him stronger still. Thus, trade increases inequality. So the only way to avoid enormous inequality is to share everything. That's my explanation. Our society has the resources to end poverty and to provide health care and college for all. But that's not happening. In our present system, things only happen when they make the rich richer. Most people are not lazy. The real reason we hate Mondays is because our workplaces are little dictatorships. Automation is accelerating. It increases productivity, and that ought to mean more leisure for all of us. But instead it means greater profits for the handful of capitalists who own the machines, and fewer jobs for everyone else. Competition for the remaining jobs grows desperate, so employers can reduce pay, and then even some people with jobs are homeless. Thus, technological progress is making our lives worse. That's not inherent in technology. Rather, it's inherent in capitalism. But this trend can't continue much longer. Fewer employed people means fewer customers able to buy the goods and services that the robots are producing. What the crash will be like, and what the next system will be like, depend on our planning for them. Part 4: Alienation. Property separates us, and competition destroys empathy. Your loss is not my loss, and might even be my gain. If you're not just like me, then it's easy for me to blame you for your difficulties, and to blame you for my difficulties too. Thus we get racism, sexism, imperialism, austerity, and other kinds of bullying. Thus we get theft, assault, random shootings, and all-out war. We will only be made safe by changing to a culture of caring and sharing that leaves no one behind, so that no one wants to hurt us. Anything that can be done competitively can be done better cooperatively. But in a kinder world, plutocrats would lose power, and so they take no steps in that direction. The basic principle of capitalism is every man for himself, get all you can, and to hell with the commons. The so-called efficiency of the market is a lie, for the commons is being destroyed by externalities, unmeasured side effects of the market. Externalities are not paid for by buyer or seller, rather they are borne by community and environment. Thus, capitalism is inherently ecocidal. I'll say more about that soon. Part 5: Plutocracy. Plutocracy means rule by the rich. It's essentially the same as oligarchy, rule by a few. The political class and the moneyed class have always been one, since influence and money buy each other. That we are indeed ruled by the rich is evident to anyone who looks around. For instance, look at the enormous difference between official results and exit polls in presidential primaries. But a statistical proof was published by Professors Gillens and Page in 2014. They said, disregard all the intermediate steps and simply compare what people want, as measured by polls, with what public policies we are actually getting enacted as laws. Gillens and Page found that the general public has essentially zero influence on laws, even on issues where the general public has a strong consensus. But they found that rich and powerful individuals and corporations do get the policies they want. Thus, the rich do rule. The data used by Gillens and Page covered only the years 1981 to 2002. But a study of history makes it evident, at least to me, that this has been going on for much longer. The USA has been a plutocracy thinly disguised as a democracy ever since its founding in land theft, genocide, and slavery. That won't be ended by electing better plutocrats. In fact, we've been ruled by plutocracy apparently for 10,000 years, ever since what I would call the fall, the invention of hierarchy and private property. Those two institutions are now deeply embedded in our culture, and it's hard to imagine life without them. But they're just a cultural overlay, not our true nature. We lived without them for 200,000 years before the fall, sharing everything as equals. And genetically, that's still who we are. Money is influence. It can find its way through or around any kind of regulations. Thus, the only way to end rule by the wealthy class is to not have a wealthy class. That requires a very different economic system. It would be a mistake to think that the plutocracy is a unified hierarchy, like the fabled Illuminati, carefully planning everything that happens in the world. It's not. Indeed, if the plutocrats were like the Illuminati, then they would say, come, let us take steps to save the ecosystem, on which even we depend. They have not been taking such steps. I'll discuss that in a moment. Rather, the plutocrats are an unruly mob, constantly competing against each other and trying to steal from each other, even waging wars to kill rival gangs of plutocrats. Any capitalist whose concerns stray beyond competitiveness and short-term profit will fall behind and soon will no longer be a player in the great game. He will be replaced by other capitalists. Our rulers will not and cannot take down this destructive system. Only we, the masses, can do that. Part 6. Wars. We need revolution throughout the world, but most of all in my own country, the USA, which has become the most destructive force in the world. Over half our national budget goes to the military. All the wars are based on bipartisan lies to make a few rich men richer. This means that most of our distinguished, honored statesmen, our highest-ranking politicians and business executives, are liars, thieves, and mass murderers. They have killed and maimed millions of foreigners and destroyed the homes and workplaces of millions more. Smedley Butler was, at the time of his death, the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. But in 1931, when he retired, he began speaking out against the military. He said that he had been a high-class muscle man for big business, a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism, raping half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. He later turned his speeches into a short book, War is a Racket, which can be found in bookstores and online. George Orwell's novel, 1984, was published in 1949. It depicts a totalitarian government that lies about everything. Its military branch is called the Ministry of Peace. Shortly after that novel was published, the U.S. Department of War was renamed as the Department of Defense, but its mission was not changed. A national border is a line drawn on a map by politicians who then say, the people on the other side of this line are different. But really, the people on the other side are our cousins. It's the politicians who are different. The wars have killed millions, but climate change may soon kill all of us. Part 7. Climate Apocalypse. Ecocide is everywhere. Plastic in the ocean, oil in the rivers, and most of all, carbon dioxide and methane in the air. The climate apocalypse is growing faster than most people see, because they don't understand feedback loops and tipping points, and because the oil companies have lied to them for half a century. A feedback loop is a process whose consequences are also causes. For instance, global warming is melting Arctic ice. That is both releasing methane and lowering the planet's reflectivity. Both of these processes cause more planetary warming, completing the loop. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. Since consequences are causes, the bigger a feedback process gets, the faster it grows. The resulting exponential growth is unfamiliar to us, and so it catches us by surprise. It starts off small and slow, easy to overlook or deny, but eventually it gets bigger, and soon after that it's enormous and growing explosively. Species can't evolve fast enough to keep up, and so they're rapidly going extinct. The ecosystem is losing diversity and thus becoming fragile. At some point it will pass a final tipping point and simply collapse, starving us all to death. But first, rising food prices will cause the collapse of civilization. Some preppers believe they'll do just fine after civilization collapses, but they're mistaken. Some of the feedback loops, including the ice melt that I mentioned earlier, will continue raising the planet's temperature even after civilization collapses. Our only hope of avoiding extinction is to halt global warming while we still might be able to make an organized effort before civilization collapses. We know what steps need to be taken. Replace fossil fuels with solar and wind, ban concentrated animal feeding operation meat, develop mass transit, etc. But we aren't taking those steps fast enough. The problem is not engineering, but politics. Governments of the world are doing far too little, too late. That's because they are ruled by the biggest corporations, who profit greatly from the status quo and want no changes in it. For instance, the oil companies knowingly lied about climate change for half a century, and they have great influence over governments. And there's less time than most people realize. Crop failures, deadly heat waves, and the melting of the Arctic have already begun, and the storms and fires are worse every year. Over and over, the IPCC's predictions have been too low on the severity and speed of climate change. And so, when they recently said we must turn things around by 2030, I figured 2025. And turning things around can't be done overnight, so we must begin now. Now we must choose between revolution and extinction. We no longer have time for any other options. Tell everyone what is really going on. Good luck to us all.